This is one error in the Quran that you probably haven't heard of. Roughly a century after the canonical books of the New Testament were finished, apocryphal writings about Jesus began to circulate. Now, the content of these apocryphal books were often just fairy tales about Jesus made up by fringe heretical groups. One of these writings, called the Second Treatise of the Great Seth, tells a story about how Jesus wasn't actually crucified. The Jewish crowds and the Roman guards are so blinded by ignorance that they don't realize they're crucifying the wrong guy, Simon of Cyrene. And as Jesus' stunt double is getting crucified, Jesus is actually standing off in the background laughing at him. Another one of these writings is called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. This less gruesome story talks about how Jesus as a 5-year-old took up clay from a stream and made the clay into living birds. Now, why do I mention these two books specifically? Well, the Second Treatise of the Great Seth and the Infancy Gospel of Thomas circulated around the Arabian Peninsula during the time of the first millennia. And guess who got to hear these apocryphal stories about Jesus while they were growing up? That's right, Muhammad. Muhammad was actually so sure of their historicity that he included these stories in the Quran. Surah 4 talks about how Jesus wasn't actually crucified, but how the Jews ignorantly thought they crucified him. Surah 4 157 specifically says, they neither killed nor crucified him, it was only made to appear so. And Surah 5 110 has God recalling to Jesus on Judgment Day about the time that Jesus turned clay into birds. Now, the fact that Muhammad lifted these stories from a couple of fringe fairy tales is problematic enough. But there's an even bigger error here. These stories in their original context emphasize the divinity of Christ. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth is a gnostic writing, and the author believed that the material world was evil. He records that Jesus didn't get crucified because he believed Jesus was divine, and divine beings don't have material bodies. Likewise, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas also views Jesus as divine, and it even calls him the Son of God. The author portrays Jesus as turning clay into birds in order to link him to God in Genesis 2 and how he made Adam from the dust of the ground. But this creates a self-contradiction in the Quran, because Muhammad in other places specifically denies the divinity of Jesus in the Quran. This would be the equivalent of citing Romeo and Juliet in a book about how Shakespeare never wrote a tragedy. So next time you're in a religious conversation with your Muslim friends, I challenge you, in a respectful and constructive way, bring up this dilemma and see what they say.